Hi everyone, and welcome to the second of our talks on Taoism and how it's affected meditation, and the influences that Taoism has had and can have in our meditation today. So, as you probably know, I don't prescribe to any one particular form of meditation or any one particular philosophy, excuse me, or tradition, and I don't see myself as religious in any sense. I'm just passing on um, those things that I've learnt myself, and hopefully, what I share with you will help you in your meditation practice and in your life generally, and in your spiritual growth. So, last time we began to look at Taoism itself, what it was, where it comes from. We looked at Lao Tzu, um, the the author of the Tao Te Ching, which is the main and primary source of information on Taoism and the Tao itself. And after we looked at sort of three sort of key elements of Taoism and what it stands for last time, we'll be taking the first of those today, and I'm going to have a look at that. So I'll look at what is the Tao itself. It's a bit mysterious, as the first chapter of the Tao Te Ching says. The Tao that can be described or named is not the eternal Tao. So what do we mean by that, and why would we even bother to talk about something that we can't describe? Well, obviously the writings of Lao Tzu and subsequent Taoist authors afterwards, in sharing their knowledge, do attempt to kind of explain what the Tao is and what it means. So it's a bit of a paradox, really. It's, in one sense, you can't pin it down, you can't talk about it in academic terms, you can't frame it as something which is kind of has set sort of parameters to what it is, but you can get a feel of what the Tao is. And really, it's one of those things with a lot of spiritual things, a lot of mystical things, that we can talk about them, but after a certain amount of talking about them, we actually need to kind of experience them, really. And I would go as far as to say that we all experience the Tao in our lives and going through our lives in the world every day. It is seen by Taoists as the Tao is seen as the fundamental principle of the universe. It's the source of existence, if you like. It's kind of the primal sort of source, force, energy, blueprint, if you like, which is seen as having preceded everything and preceded all. And really, it's not dissimilar, the Taoist kind of belief, to most sort of mythological and philosophical views of the universe itself, in that there's something behind the creation itself, if you like, of the worlds, the universe, of life here on Earth or anywhere else in the universe. And there's kind of an intelligence almost behind it. So the Tao, though I would say there's definitely an intelligence behind it, that there's a design, there's a concept, there's a principle by which everything is driven. And the Tao itself, really, you can kind of almost align it to the workings of nature itself. The Tao is spoken of kind of more from a kind of the feminine sort of aspect, really. Certainly, as we look at the sort of the yin and the yang principle, the yin being the female, that sort of dark aspect of the symbol, and then the yang being mostly the light, the male side. So the Tao almost, it's kind of it's that principle, it's that creative element, and of course obviously the female side is seen as the creative, and we see this in other Eastern philosophies, the yoga traditions as well. We see Shakti as being that sort of female creative element, and of course we all understand that we all come from our mothers, and even passing into our sort of our Western traditions, we talk about Mother Nature and things like this. So there is that very much that sort of feminine element of which we all originate. But the Tao, there's a lot more to the Tao than that. And the principle of Taoism is that by following the Tao and the very course of nature, the very course of the way things kind of work together in harmony, if you like. We kind of understand about ecosystems and food chains and things like this, and how we look at the earth from a biological sense. Species depend on each other, and there is a cycle of life that goes through. And a very strong analogy that's used of the Tao is that of water. And we know that water has a cycle. So we have, the water being sort of absorbed into the atmosphere, into the clouds, rain descending, raining on the mountains and the higher places, forming lakes, then streams and rivers, tributaries into bigger rivers, and then into the oceans. And of course, the cycle repeats itself. And this very analogous of the cycle of life as well, that everything goes around and it all revolves around. It's all a very circular sort of motion. So as I said, we can't describe the Tao academically and sort of say it's this, it's got these sort of dimensions, it's this shape, it has this personality, etc. The Tao isn't seen as a person in that we would see God as a kind of, this kind of figure, and we have into kind of the Judeo-Christian traditions, we have this very much a male character, of which man is created in the image of God, and he's referred to as a he, very much a male sort of character. And though I say there's a feminine side, it's not, gender doesn't come into it really, the Tao, because the Tao isn't actually seen as a person as such. In fact, the idea that the Tao is a person who kind of created everything, doesn't really fit in with the kind of the Chinese philosophy. It's more a process, it's more of an organic, as I say, cycle and way of things happening. It's almost like the Tao is a principle or a blueprint, almost a force, if you like. And I mentioned last time that the concept used by George Lucas in the Star Wars films was derived from the idea of the Tao as being this overarching force and controlling element that runs through all of creation, all of the universe, in fact. If we use the analogy of kind of like computing and IT and stuff like that, it's almost like an operating system. That's to very much sort of boil it down simply. And of course, it's not, we can't really refer to it in those terms, because we would be using man-made, artificial, scientific terms. And of course, if we look at nature, when we look at anything man-made, we see our kind of squares, right angles, geometric patterns. Not to say that these aren't found in nature, but what we do find in nature is very much a sort of an irregularity. The late great Alan Watts describes the world as being wiggly, full of sort of wiggly lines, if you like. Whereas the man-made world, we like to make everything with straight lines, and the straightest line distance between 2 points is a straight line, as we see, and humans have been kind of obsessed with this kind of angularity, to make everything kind of square and flat, etc. So we kind of like this way of doing things. But when we look at nature is very organic, and it follows kind of a natural sort of path. You look at the path of a river, and you see that it basically everything works in harmony together. So the path of water follows the path from the highest to the lowest, and so it starts off at a high place, as in say the mountains, and it eventually finds its way into the sea, which is the lowest point. The point of sea level is the lowest place that it will go. And reading the words of Lao Tzu, we see that is an excellent analogy of what the Tao is. It says that the Tao does not seek the high places. It's almost got this humble element where it goes to the lowest point. Water does this, and to follow the way of the Tao is to make ourselves low by following after that. So from a human perspective, to follow the Tao is to follow this kind of organic, natural sort of flow and path. It's the way of the universe. It's the ultimate reality, if you like. Everything else that we see, that we've created, is inferior to the superior organic pattern of things, the pattern of nature, etc. And everything we see in all life on earth all follows this sort of same pattern of the Tao. Everything flows organically, and everything lives harmoniously, really. It's not to say that one type of creature doesn't eat another creature, but as I say, it's all part of one cycle, and we're all interdependent on each other. We may see ourselves as humans as being this species that's kind of conquered the planet and kind of brought everything into our subjugation and subdued nature into our will, but it's complete nonsense, really, because nature doesn't need us to exist. We need nature to exist, and if we think we've subdued it, well, you just have to look at natural events like volcanoes, earthquakes, tsunamis, the erosion of the coastline by the sea. All of these things are out of our control. The seasons, the way the weather changes, we can't control these things. We might try to, and we might think that we have ways around to kind of harness nature, but if we really look deeply and we really understand, we will see that really our control is very, very limited of that. So the Tao itself, it can't actually be seen, it can't be heard, it can't be smelt, tasted or touched. Our five senses can't actually define it, and it can't be understood by our human minds. In fact, it can't be understood by any mind, really. It's beyond that. It's so incredibly complex. Whatever we've done as mankind, as human beings, is never as complex as the workings of nature when we look into them. And yet we feel that somehow that we have to kind of work and strive to keep everything going. And this reflects in our own lives, really. It rather than kind of looking at the Tao as a kind of a scientific principle that can be understood, you just have to look at it as a natural force, just like we would see something like gravity or electricity as a kind of a force that flows through things. Though the Tao hasn't actually got a form in itself, it is seen as being able to take on the form of anything, just like water can take. So if you get a container of any size and you fill it with water, the water will fill that space and become the shape of that space. So, what's the shape of water? Well, the shape of water is whatever that water is put into becomes, the water becomes that shape. And the Tao is very adaptable and flows in that way. And the teaching of the Tao is that we, as human beings, should all return to the way of the Tao. We should all return to that natural, harmonious way of living in nature. Now, if you look at modern society, you'll see and experience every day that we are so far away from living in harmony with nature. And we all live this kind of frantic life, which seems to have reached its kind of zenith in the 21st century. We all seem to be dictated to by human constructs. I mean, things like time, things like plans, things like laws, regulations, protocols, ethics, things like this are all completely man-made. If we could go back completely to nature and live in accordance with the Tao, then Taoism teaches us that we wouldn't really need these principles and concepts that we all use every day. And yet we see in our lives that we are so much embedded, or they're so much embedded into our lives and how we actually act every day. So really, what I'd like to say and use, and the purpose why I'm kind of using this sort of, I'm going down this line of kind of explaining the Tao, is obviously to bring it back to the idea of meditation, and how our meditation doesn't just have to be the time that we're sitting in meditation for whatever time that we have, but it's that meditation is a lifestyle which we take outside of the meditation room, outside of the meditation mat, and we go into our lives and we live a life of meditation. The Buddhists have got many different types of meditation, for instance, like sort of walking meditation and other types of meditation. The Taoists have got things like Tai Chi and Qigong and things like that, which are kind of movements of flow and things like this. They're practical ways of kind of moving with this flow of Tao. But with our lives generally, to move away from the social constraints and the things that constrain us, the rules and regulations, the rigidity of the human civilization in which we live, is to move back towards the natural flow of nature and the workings of the natural order of things, is very much to get back into the Tao. And when we bring this over into our actual sitting in meditation, I mentioned last time Zuowang, which is a principle of meditation that's used in Taoism, and the term Zuowang means sitting and forgetting. So, although we've looked in the previous months at different types of meditation, from India and moving further eastward, and eventually now we've sort of come to the area of China and the Far East. There are many different schools of meditation, different techniques, and we looked at the yogic techniques. We looked obviously at the chakra system, and how we have this system of energy that runs through our body, and how the yogic system works in line with that. And of course, this is a natural process, so it fits in with the Tao and what the Tao speaks of, and how the Tao works. So the Tao is not in any way contradictory to the yogic traditions at all. But whereas the yogic traditions give a lot of kind of guidelines and a lot of techniques and practices from sort of the asana postures of yoga, which we're probably most familiar with when we use the word yoga in the West. We think of the yoga postures and the various different positions of the body and the physical aspect of that. And we, in the past, excuse me, I've mentioned the fact that really those asanas are to kind of prepare us to kind of sit in meditation. And even sitting in meditation, there are certain, in the yogic traditions, there are certain traditions and practices that we would adopt, from hand mudras of the various different types and forms that we see, to breathing, alternate nostril breathing, things like that. The Ayurvedic use of sort of food preparation and eating, drinking and things like that. In fact, the yogic practices are a complete sort of lifestyle. Now, when we come into Taoism, it's not that there isn't a kind of a lifestyle that we can adopt, because we can, and we can adopt a lifestyle that is a sort of a following after the Taoist patterns. But the whole principle behind Taoism is, unlike the yogic traditions and the Buddhist traditions, for instance, Taoism, it's far more of a loose, organic process, and that's, as I said, this is with the Tao, this organic pattern and working, and the way the universe and the world and life on earth operates is in that kind of organic, natural flow of things. So Taoism itself in its practices is more organic. So when we sit down and we adopt the practice of Zuowang, which is literally sitting and forgetting, we don't necessarily have to adopt, although we can, and I for one kind of would adopt some of the yogic practices, certainly things like sitting with the spine straight, maybe sitting in one of the sort of the postures, whether it's on a yoga mat, whether we're sort of in the lotus position or half lotus, etc., or whether we just adopting that posture. That's good practice. And we look before at the kind of the physical benefits and how that helps us to concentrate and things like that. But Taoist meditation is almost the antithesis of the structure in that sense. I suppose you could say that a lot of the spiritual traditions of meditation are, as far as man-made systems and processes go, they're at least trying to connect to something outside of ourselves. They're not sort of saying, okay, we're human beings, we are the conquerors and the subduers of the world and everything here, so we do it our way. It's very much because we've looked at the spiritual side of things, and we looked at the fact that obviously there's more to us than just our physical bodies and our minds. We know that we've got a spiritual aspect to us, but Taoism kind of tries to connect that spiritual element of ourselves back into nature itself and sort of plug us back into nature. So when we sit down to meditate, it's more fluid. We can bring in things like mudras, we can bring in seating positions and things like that if we wish, but they're certainly not mandatory. We certainly don't have to do that. I like to use certain ones myself, but there's no reason why you couldn't, for instance, just go and sit in a park on a park bench. Close your eyes or not close your eyes and just sit there silently and just be aware of your surroundings, be aware of what's going on around you. And as I say, as we sit, we forget. Gradually, after acknowledging the five senses, after acknowledging the body, after acknowledging, and we can use things like a body scan, which I often do. So moving through, fixing our focus of attention on different parts of the body, moving through. And as we kind of have acknowledged those different parts and those different systems of the body, if we just then sort of allow them to pass by, like the thoughts that we allow to pass by, we just sort of let them go. And letting go is a big part of the Taoist philosophy, letting go of things. Now, as I said, we've got a world which is made of structures and principles. We're all so, we're all so obsessed with time and schedules and ways of doing things, techniques and principles of doing things. And of course, in the 21st century, we've created ourselves a whole load of new tasks and things that we have to do. We have to check our mobile phones, we have to check for messages, we have to check our social media, we have to check the news, we have to check the weather, we have to check our timetables, we have to check our calendars. More and more and more things that we have to do, that we put on ourselves. And of course, we've got a whole system of civilization that calls for us to be aware of so many different things. One of the things that makes it more difficult for us now is we have so many choices and decisions that we have to make, or it feels like we have to make them. So the principle of letting go and just giving in to the flow of nature around us can be a very difficult process to follow. It can be a very difficult sort of technique to get into, really. It's really, and that's why I said in my little introduction on my other video, it's almost like dropping out. Now, as a university dropout myself, who got so far and dropped out of my A-levels, dropped out of university, I'm not saying I'm proud of that, it's just what happened. It's what happened, but that was kind of the flow of events for me. But back in the day, back in the 1960s, it was almost a way of life. There was this principle of kind of dropping out of the system, if you like, and getting back to a simpler way of life. So I'm not saying this is an essential thing that we need to drop out of society. Everything that's in our society, in our civilization, is there for a reason. It's been put in there for logical reasons. And if things are working for us, and they help us to keep our lives together in some sort of order, then that's absolutely fine. I'm not saying go and break your clocks up and rip up your calendars and destroy your phones, or smash your television sets. I'm not saying any of those things, but the difference is, are they running our lives for us, or are we using them to our advantage? And unfortunately, for a lot of people that I see, they are absolutely slaves to all of these various systems that work in our lives today. And I, for one, would like to kind of break free from many of these things that bind us, should I say, and to understand and to begin to see how the Taoists thought about things. They weren't so pent up and worried about following systems. I mentioned Confucianism before, and the way of Confucianism is that everything has a social order and a pattern to it, and there's always a way that things have to be done, a social order for things, etc. And Taoism came along and said the natural order of things is by far superior to that. We need to kind of chill out, we need to kind of relax, and we need to go with the flow. And of course, in our modern lives, we constantly are told that if we don't fight, work hard, work, and push, we're not going to achieve things. And success and achievement have become the greatest virtue almost in the world today. So sort of in previous times, spiritual things have been very virtuous, you know, morals, ethics, spiritual things, compassion, kindness, worship. All of these things were seen as very much virtuous kind of qualities and properties to have. In the world today, we've got new virtues, and new virtues are basically success and progression and climbing the social ladder, climbing the gaining more possessions for ourselves, getting a higher place in our career, getting a higher education, climbing higher in society, etc. And everybody seems to be on this path where if they don't keep working and pushing and working, then they'll somehow fail. Well, there's almost a sense to which in Taoism it's okay to fail. It doesn't matter, because there's not really any success or failure. There is just the Tao. There is just this natural order of things. And there's a great freedom when we actually get to that point where we stop fighting, we stop struggling, we stop working so hard to make the world work and our lives work, and we just kind of relax into it. And when we go into Zuowang meditation, where we're sitting and forgetting, then there's an aspect of which when we sit back, we let it all go, we allow the background around us to fade. We gradually allow all these sensations to kind of subside into the background, and we go inside ourselves. We reach a state of deep absorption within ourselves, not in our minds, certainly not with our egos, not with that full sense of self, but with the true self and with our inner self, our inner being. We can go into ourselves. The self of the ego can be forgotten. The mind can be quieted, and we can start to experience the Tao directly. So the Tao is not something that we can understand academically. I can't write down for you. I can't explain exactly what the Tao is. I can't tell you its size, its shape, its colour, its smell, or any of those things. All I can say is it's a principle. It's like we get to that point when we meditate through the Tao, that we're resting on the present moment without making any judgment about what's happening around us. We allow everything to recede into the background. We absorb ourselves in ourselves, in our inner state, and we let everything go. And it is so incredibly freeing. I can't express to you enough how freeing that is. So you might say to me, well, you've been trying to kind of tell us all these different techniques to meditation. Now you're saying just sort of let go and don't worry about them. Well, essentially I am really, and what I'm saying to you is it's great to follow the various different practices and techniques in meditation, because it gives us an excellent grounding. And we need, as human beings, I feel that we need the discipline to get us going, to get us off the ground, because without me giving you a technique and a principle to sort of start you off on the meditation path, and we've talked about rituals, we've talked about techniques, we've talked about mudras, mantras, malas, we've talked about chakras, we've talked about all of these different things and how they all act as excellent tools to help us to get into the meditative state. But when we've got an understanding and grounding in that, then this type of meditation where we simply let go is incredibly freeing. And I'm a firm believer that meditation in itself shouldn't be complicated, it shouldn't be hard work, it should be an absolute pleasure and joy. And every day when you sit down to meditate and you're in your quiet place and you just sit down, you just absorb yourself in the present moment. You're not focusing on the past. You're not focusing on the future. You're focusing on now, this present moment. You're being mindful of this moment. But you're just allowing everything to go. This, for me, takes me into a deeper state of meditation. And in Taoist meditation, they don't talk about things like samadhi, nirvana, or kind of, enlightenment in the same way that the yogis or the Buddhists will talk about them. But I fully believe that those states can be reached simply by sitting quietly and in stillness and letting go and tapping into that state. Okay, so I hope that's made some sort of sense today. Next time we'll look at more at the yin and yang and what that means, the contrast of the light and dark, the two sides of the coin, etc. But I hope that this makes some sense about what the Tao actually is. If you want to know more about the Tao, then I strongly urge you to read the Tao Te Ching, and there are excellent apps even that you can get for your phone that will give you either a daily verse or the full text of the Tao as well, or you can easily go onto Amazon or one of the other websites where you can obtain a copy of the Tao Te Ching. There are so many different translations of it into English, a bit like the Bible. I think second only to the Bible, it's been translated into more languages than anything else, and more attempts have been made to translate it into different languages than anything else as well. But each one will give you a little bit something else, really. But yeah, so I'm not going to go on too long about this because it's just, as I say, one in the series, but hopefully it makes some sense. And I will speak to you on the next video. If you like this, please give us a thumbs up. If you want to hear more about this, then certainly consider subscribing to this channel. If you have any comments that you want to make or any questions that you want to ask, I will attempt to answer them. Just pop your comments in the box below the screen there. And other than that, I will see you next time. Namaskaram.